Picked up a few extra people. Welcome.
Lost a couple. Sad. We scared them off already.
Probably too cold.
It's too cold.
Yeah.
They're just running late.
It's dark. It's night.
Yeah, and some will still come in. So, did anybody remember to do their homework?
I tried to remember what it was.
Excellent.
I couldn't remember.
You at least thought of it. And some people did it. Okay.
And some of us are new, so you didn't know. Okay, so your homework was to take your Myers-Briggs to go to humanmetrics.com and do your, oh yeah, that's what I was
Lord,
supposed
it.
That's why you take notes on your phone.
Yeah.
You go back and look at it.
I would have
So-
liked to know more personality, but
Well, hop on your phone right now, go to
it's definitely not
humanmetrics.
passive aggressive, I'm sure.
Well, maybe by us going through it tonight, you'll be able to figure out what you are, based off of what we talk about. So we're gonna talk about we're gonna talk about personality, we're gonna talk about learning style, we're gonna talk about birth order, and if we have enough time, we'll talk about gender differences. And we're doing that to talk about how you and your mate are usually different, and how does that mean you're going to parent differently. And then, by the way, your kids won't necessarily have your personality type either, so how do you, as your personality type, parent somebody else that's this other personality type? And are you the firstborn, and you're parenting your thirdborn? And what does that mean? Or maybe you are the sixth born in your family and you have an only child. And there's a reason, because you are sixth in a line. And you're like, that's it. Nope, we're going to have one. No. Whatever, they all play a part in how you and your mate are going to parent in your home with your kids. So that's why we wanted to focus on that tonight.
So the theme is differences.
Right.
And hopefully we're going to prove to you that the differences are a good thing. But that's where much of the conflict between parents comes from, is in the differences. And we're going to start with the Myers-Briggs for those of you that actually either did the homework and found out what you are, or you've done this at some other time and you know what you are.
Okay, wait.
No.
Okay.
No, we're going to put you on groups in a little bit, do some discussion. But we're going to start by just taking a poll. For those of you that know what you are. That sounds bad, doesn't it? How many of y'all are extroverts? If you're a Myers-Briggs type, that means you're an E. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Then claim it.
How many of you are introverts? Whoa! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That is interesting. For several reasons. Yeah, the second axis that they measure on this personality is sensing versus intuition. Now, most people think they know what extroversion, introversion is. Very few people know the difference between sensing and intuition. So how many of y'all measured as an S, or a sensing person? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
He keeps track
Okay.
of what I don't keep track.
Okay, so how many of you were an intuitive person?
Interesting.
7. That is interesting. And 2 people aren't sure what that is.
That's right. He has some unknowns in there.
I'm just sure, I don't know.
Okay, how many of you measured as a feeling person? 1, 2, 3, 4,
What's the other one?
6, 7,
Thinking.
8, 9. Got 9 of those.
Feeling.
10 of those. Okay, how many of you were a thinking person? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
It really said I was both. I
Okay,
measured the same on those two.
yeah, it
Well,
equals,
like 1% more on the
Yeah.
thinking.
and he'll talk about that too, but yeah, you're very close.
That's actually a good thing. I mean, it's a bad thing for what we're doing. It's a good thing for life. Okay, and then the final one is perceiving versus judging. And judging gets a bad rap. So if you're judging, don't feel bad about it. It's not like, the sinful Christian judging. This is the way your brain works.
Said from a judging person.
Perceiving, how many of you measured as a perceiving person?
Look,
One person. Okay, how many
And
measured
that's
as a
me.
judging person?
that is me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Great Church of Christ people, right?
Except for one of us.
So we'll make you.
By the way, this is me. That's him. Complete.
Yeah, that's why, according to the site that y'all went to, if you paid the $4 when you get down to the bottom and it wants to look at your personality type and your mate's personality type, it'll give you the likelihood that your relationship will last. We have a 13%, I
Yeah.
think it was, likelihood of staying together. So the odds are definitely against us. So it's 42 and a half years.
We're beating those odds so far.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about what this means. Because just because you're one of these does not mean that your kids are. They may be the same as you, they may be different. But because there are 16 different possible combinations, the odds are that you will not have a child with the exact same combination as you or your mate. So then that really does complicate parenting. An extrovert is somebody that is energized by people. They're fascinated with people. They are interested in the world of people. Now, they could still be shy. They still might like to sit in the corner and watch people, but people are what fascinates them. Introverts are energized by the world of ideas. They get lost in their head. They like to think through things. Big difference there. And the two often have trouble communicating with each other. Most couples, something like 90% of all couples out there, are composed of an extrovert married to an introvert. Which means you have great parenting going on because you both understand the two different ways of looking at the world. Looking at people, looking at ideas. Then you have sensing versus intuitive. Now, in Western society, the population evenly breaks down into 50% extrovert, 50% introvert, unlike what breaks down in this room. But on the sensing versus intuitive, it's more like 55% sensing, 45% intuitive. So there's a little bit more sensing, and our numbers kind of reflect that. Sensing people, this is how you take in information. All of this deals with the way you interact with the world around you. It's all based upon how do you use your 5 senses. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Everything you know about the world is experienced through one of those 5 senses. For everybody. And your brain processes those in certain ways. And there are certain patterns of processing that put you in common categories. So that you and other people in that category process things more alike than people in the other categories do. So sensing people tend to just take stuff in. It's kind of like, this conveyor belt of information coming in from the different senses. And it just keeps coming in and piling up at the end of the conveyor belt. And eventually you'll sort through it and store it somewhere where you can recall it if you want to. As opposed to intuitive people. Intuitive people, the information's coming down the conveyor belt, and they're rapidly pulling stuff off and storing it away, putting it up on the shelves or hanging it on the hooks, and the stuff they don't get off the conveyor belt just goes in the chute and disappears. So intuitive people do not store away everything. They only store away the stuff that they store away. Whereas sensing people eventually store away everything. So police detectives really prefer to interview witnesses who are sensing as opposed to intuitive people, because there's big gaps in what they notice for intuitive people. The stuff they noticed very well, and they know exactly where it's stored. They have quick recall, they have in-depth recall, but they have gaps. Then you have feeling versus thinking. Now this one is interesting because it's the only one of these 4 different axes that seems to be sex linked. 70% of females will assess out as being a feeling person and 30% a thinking person. 70% of males test out as being a thinking person and 30% a feeling person. So if you're a male thinker or a female feeler, then you're fairly normal with the rest of the population. But if you're a male feeler or a female thinker, you probably felt just a little bit out of sync with much of the rest of the world in that one area. The way this looks is all this information you're bringing in, what do you do with it? And you see it clearest in how do you make decisions about other people. Thinking people have established criteria, usually the rules. And based on those established criteria, that's how they make decisions about what's right and wrong. Feeling people are more interested in what's best for everybody. I don't want anybody's feelings to get hurt. I don't want anybody to physically get hurt. You know, I think maybe this person won, but these people should have consolation trophies too. I mean, that's feeling people. Feeling people make great mamas. Thinking people are usually the dads. And there's almost always a conflict between the feeling mama that wants, you know, the children to be loved even when they're disciplined, and the dad that's like, they gotta learn what's right and wrong. You know, if I have to beat them to death, I will, but they will do the right thing by the time they grow up, or they'll go to prison. So a dad's motivation is to keep his kids out of prison, and a mama's motivation is to love them. If the mama's a feeling person and the dad's a thinking person. But if they're reversed on that, it may be the dad that's the loving person and the mom that's the disciplinarian saying, you are not going to grow up and embarrass me by going to prison. And a lot of you are nodding because you now make sense to yourself. And maybe your mate makes sense to you. That's just how we're wired. Blame it on God. He's the one that made us this way. And this is something you're made. This is not something you grow into. The whole concept of personality is you're born with it, like eye color and hair color and skin color. This is the way you're genetically programmed. Then you have perceiving versus judging. And again, there's a little bit more perceivers than judgers in the world, unlike in this room.
I feel very lonely over here.
It's, if I remember right, it's something like 52% perceivers, 48% judgers, and it's not sex linked, so male or female, either way, there's more perceivers. Perceivers, they will tend to notice the input of their 5 senses based upon whichever sense is being stimulated the strongest. So they're noticing this interesting sight over here until this noise distracts them, and then this smell gets their notice, and they just move from sense to sense based on what's the strongest. Whereas a judging person has an established criteria for the situation. And they can usually focus based upon what the other senses are. If they don't apply to the criteria, they're not really interested. So let's say you've got a couple where one is judging and one's perceiving, and they're out on a date. And they've chosen to go to this nice restaurant that's just opened up in town because the review they read about the restaurant. And it had a great review, but it really got their attention because it has the best filet mignon that the reviewer has ever had. So like, we both like filet mignon, let's go out there and eat steak. But one of them's a perceiver, so as you go into the restaurant, you notice how the facade is looking, you notice the color of the door, you walk inside, you notice the smell, you notice the lighting, you notice the carpet and the uniforms of the wait staff, and you notice the candles and ambiance and the orchestra playing and the white tablecloths and the silverware and the china and the people that are talking softly. And the person that's the judger, they sort of notice all of that. But they're like, how long are we going to have to wait? Okay, we're going to have to sit down. Do we have to eat the salad? When do I get the steak? And they may notice all the rest of the stuff till that steak's put in front of them. And then all of their senses are concentrated on sight of the steak, smell of the steak, taste of the steak, texture of the steak. It's the steak. Whereas a perceiving person may have a great experience with the steak, but they're just taking everything in. When you're a perceiving parent, you have a judging child. It'll drive you nuts on how focused they get, and they can't seem to notice all this other stuff. So you have to prepare them for what they're supposed to notice. And if you have them prepared, they will notice it. But if you don't, it's whatever their expectation is that they're supposed to know. So if you're going to the beach for the first time, and they're all about the waves, the sand is in the way. They got to get to the waves. So you have to prepare them with all the different experiences they're supposed to notice. Now, if they're a perceiving child, and you're a judging parent, you may not know to prepare them for all of that. And then we start putting these combinations together. There's 16 possible combinations. Well, let's just start with the INTJ. How many of you are INTJs? Yeah, that's normal. That's a very unusual combination. How about ESFPs? Okay, we got one of each.
Well, they've got a greater chance of their marriage working already, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of them. Okay, how about ENFP? Okay, how about ENTP? How about an
Yeah, put a J at the end of that, you're gonna get any of us.
Remember, they're all eyes in this room.
No, it's ENTJ. Okay, we got two of those.
Two ENTJs.
Okay.
You're right.
ENFJ. One.
There's one back there.
Okay. How about an ESFJ?
1, 2.
Two.
I could have just about guessed that was yours.
6. We run two of these. ES. ESTJ.
Yeah. ESTJ 1.
Okay.
You got one more.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 J's, 3 P's, and we don't have any more P's, so it won't be them. Okay. How about an ISTJ? 1, 2, 3,
4.
4. Wow. That's a cool one. Okay. ISFJ.
Ooh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, that's unusual. It's interesting to see why certain people cluster in certain areas. And certain religious groups, different personalities cluster. Certain college majors, certain people or personality types cluster. Careers, you see a lot of different clustering of the different types of people. Okay.
INs. Oh wait, I'm rushing you.
IN,
INTJ.
we got that one. INFJ. 2.
You don't have INT. Oh, yeah, right there.
Right there.
Sorry.
FJ, INFP.
Yeah. INFP, 1.
I'll find out if Byron went all the way through this once and it didn't, it gave me a oops error.
ISFP.
ISFP. There's,
Still no
yeah,
Ps.
remember there's.
Oh,
no
that's
Ps.
right, no, please, okay,
Hey, there is 2 of us.
okay.
Corey came in, see, they came in late, so they didn't get in the count.
Yeah, we threw up.
So what have I left out? IS, INs, IFs, I need more ITs.
IST? Oh, you got S. Yeah, ISTP. You just don't have one.
Yeah, we shouldn't have, anybody in ISTP?
No,
Okay. Then there should be an,
you should have one more IN. You need one more IN, don't you? We have 2.
okay, well, who is something I haven't called out?
I'll tell you in a minute.
What is yours?
I'm at INTJ.
You asked if anybody was INTJ and how many
Okay.
I am not
You're
surprised that you're an INTJ. Okay, so we've covered this whole room except for the person still in process. We're all gonna be fascinated with what you end up doing.
Most of all him. Okay. So we're spread out. I mean, if you look at, there's some that are bunched, obviously, right here. And then everything else is just pretty spread out. That's pretty normal in any population. You're going to find there are those that are more popular in certain areas, more conducive to being parents or grouped together. That just kind of happens. Almost always, as you start putting those together, you start noticing your differences. As Alan was going through what each of those letters stand for, and you start seeing how you're made up, there should have been some oh moments in how that plays for you as a parent, but also as you as a mate. Because as you understand each other and you understand how that all fits together, then you can also understand why you may parent differently. And one of the things that Alan and I really stress is it's okay to parent differently. You should parent differently. You should have the same common end goal. You should know together what you want the product to look like when you're through. But how it gets there can be different between the two of you because you each bring a skill set, a personality set that will achieve that goal differently. And you should complement each other. One of the things Alan hasn't talked about yet is the scale because you had percentages as well. Well, 50% is right in the middle. And so if your numbers are closer to that middle between your numbers, and it's harder, you can kind of go either way. When Alan and I did this as young adults, what we discover is not just that we're the exact opposite, we're in the 90th percentiles on the opposites. We're as far apart as we can just about be. That also adds to a conflict with us. But once we started seeing that, what we changed was how we saw it as being different and started seeing it as how we complement each other. How we take our differences and make it a teamwork. There are things I'm better at. That's not egotistical, that's just the way I am. I'm better at some things. He's better at some things. There were times when I said, Tag, you're it. You get that boy for a while because not me. And he would be like, you gotta go talk to that girl, because I'm gonna kill her. Because I don't know what to do with all that emotion and all her not thinking, all her feeling, sensing stuff she's got going on. Because we could do that, because we knew what each other's strengths were.
Now, talking about the percentages, the way each one of these 4 scales is set up, theoretically, okay, what are you?
ESTJ.
ESTJ.
There's one of them already, so that makes 2.
2 of us now.
Woohoo!
Okay. Theoretically, if you're a pure one of these, like if you're a pure extrovert, your rate is 100%. If you're a pure introvert, your rate is 100%. If you're perfectly balanced between the 2, which theoretically you can't be, so the way all these scales are set up, it forces you to end up being one or the other. You're at least a 1 on one side of the divide. But if you're really close to the 0, that means you're very balanced. You have many of the characteristics of each side. That means you can communicate better with people on either side. And this is where you most clearly see this, is in the communication and the ability to understand people who are different than you. So the way this is theoretically set up is you've got 16 categories in this kind of relationship. If you are one of these 4 categories in the middle, ISFP, INFP, ESFP, ENFP, then you are the most balanced personality type as far as everybody else, because you tend to get along well with everybody in your square and everybody in a square that touches your square. Whereas if you're in one of the corners, you're an ISTJ, INTJ, ESTJ, ENTJ, you're the ones that get along or understand the least of the rest of the world. Because you only understand the people in your square and these 3 squares that connect to yours. Now I'm stuck over here in this little square. So, and my entire adult life has been involved with people. And I'm an introvert. I'm like a 96% introvert. But I like the idea of people, not necessarily people themselves, but the concept. You know, why are people the way they are? And trying to understand people and trying to then help people to be different. So I like the theories about them and then seeing if we can put it into practice. But it's taken a whole lot of training for me to understand all these other people that are just very foreign to me. Like my wife, who's down here in this square. See, we don't touch at all, personality-wise.
I really don't then. Because we're on opposite corners, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we will have to work to understand each other. And then there's ways you learn how to not just make assumptions about what the other person's saying, what the other person wants. You're more inquisitive because you realize we are very different. So I do have to listen more. Now, ideally, to use this in parenting, you would just test your child when it's born, find out what its personality type is, and treat it accordingly. Unfortunately, the way this particular scale is set up, you do not register accurately until you're around 20 to 21 years of age. And it's very popular to use with high school seniors and college freshmen to help them figure out majors, even though we know it does not accurately record what their real personality is at that age. You know, it's like a 20% error. But it's still popular to use. So if you've had this at some point around that time, and then you've taken it recently, the more recent one is the more accurate one. Now, if you take it around 22, say, years of age, and again at 32, and again at 42, and again at 52, you should get the same letters, but different percentages. Because the normal adult in interacting with the world moderates towards the middle. Now, if you take this up in your 60s and you've been very active with people much of your life, all of your 4 letters, whatever they are, should be very close to the middle. because you've learned to accommodate people on the other side. And so personality becomes less and less a problem in getting along with other people as you go through your life. So how does this impact parenting? If you're an introvert and they're an extrovert, their chattering can drive you nuts. If you're an extrovert and they're an introvert, their need to disappear into a corner or into their room or into their quiet place and abandon you may drive you nuts. You know, sensing, intuitive, you're just like, why don't you remember? Feeling, thinking. You know, if you're one of these feeling people and you have a child that's one of these intense rule followers, it'll bother you that they are so locked into following the rules, because, you know, sometimes there's exceptions. And sometimes you don't care for the rules that they're following. You know, lots of people make rules. They may not be people you approve of. And then the judging, perceiving. You know, having to get them, as I used the example a while ago, prepared to notice what you want them to notice to get the most out of the experience you're trying to provide for them. You can start trying to figure out, even at birth, some basics about personality. If you notice a newborn, 30 minutes into their life, this child is either trying to crawl back into the blanket, is whining and crying and complaining about life, or is quiet and looking around at everything and just fascinated with everything that's going on. You can at least see those three different distinct behaviors which are consistent with the way they'll be the rest of their life. So the one that's crying and complaining, that's probably going to be an anxious child. So you don't know which one of these 4 or 16 they'll be, but you know that part of their personality has already shown itself. The one that's quiet and looking around and all, that's an adventurous, curious child. They're going to get hurt a lot. But who knows what they'll grow up to be, because they're curious. And then the ones trying to crawl back in the blanket. That's probably a shy child. That's probably a child that you have to encourage it constantly to try things. And then as they get older, I mean, by the time they're 1, more of their personality comes out. By the time they're 3, a whole lot more of the personality comes out. And you can definitely see how they're different from other children, and maybe different from you. Especially if your mom is around watching them and keeps saying, well, you never acted like that, or they're the spitting image of you. Something like that. I mean, mamas are good at that. So you want to talk about birth order?
Yep, we can just jump in. Okay, we're going to talk just briefly about birth order. Took a lot of time. This is big. I mean, it plays such a huge part of who you are and how you interact with people. It's a big chunk. Birth order. How many of you in this room are only children? Okay. How many? 3. How many of you are firstborns? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And middle children. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Last born. 1, 2, woo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7.
Y'all do a lot better than normal last
Yeah,
born
you're pretty
couples.
good. Okay.
Sherry,
Yes.
first biological.
First biological. Well,
Yeah.
that always complicates things when there's adopted and all that other good stuff.
Am I
But,
second or first?
yeah. Were you already here whenever your sibling was adopted?
She's 3.5 years older. She was adopted when she was 4.
So they adopted her and then you came along.
So you're.
So
Adopted
technically,
first.
Huh?
She was adopted first.
she was adopted
Yeah.
and then you came along.
Right.
So she's the firstborn. In the structure of your family, if you had been born, and although she's older than you, and had been adopted into, it plays differently into the structure. because you will have established yourself as the firstborn, and then she came in. That's a different story. So adoption always plays its own real weird rules for that, and it does affect. But basically, when we separate out only children, because they have the role of all of it. They do it all. They're in charge, and they're the baby. They get their way. They get it all. So therefore, they're a combination. Firstborns tend to be overachievers, overly anxious. They have a tendency to be very successful. They also definitely are the rule followers and enforcer of the rules. Middle children, often called the invisible child. Middle kids are the ones who try and keep peace. They try and keep everybody at status quo, because if everybody's okay, then they're okay. They have a job to do as that. Otherwise, they're not too connected in some of that job-related part of the family. They're not the firstborn in charge of making sure everybody follows mom. They're not the little mama, little daddy. And they're not the baby. They're that middle one. The middle children have a tendency to be more adventuresome, higher risk takers, good and bad. And they also have a tendency to be in a workplace the person everybody wants to be friends with, just because they like that calm, peaceful nature, and they're going to try and please everybody. And then the baby. The baby is almost always one of the more secure children. Mom and Dad kind of figured it out by then. They know what they're doing, so baby comes along. Baby also is used to getting what baby wants. And baby can be very resentful of the older two, especially the oldest telling them what to do all the time. But they can also be, as a rule, very loving and caring. Because they are so loved and cared for as the baby, they have a tendency to be loving and caring. Now, I hate being old.
So I had a unique upbringing.
Yes.
And I think I am 50% middle and 50% last.
Okay.
Because I was the baby, but I was the only male in the household.
Uh-huh.
So there was a lot of stuff where I didn't get a vote. I
Yeah.
was automatically ignored.
Right. Because you were the male. I was the other. I was the middle child, but I was the only girl for a long time. Like 11 years before the girls came along after me. So yeah, and it does influence, because I was put into the position of oldest in charge when I shouldn't have been. Okay, what was I going to say about oldest and babies and so when you get to be our age and you start looking at your children who are going to care for you when you're old. So the breakdown goes, the first will pay for everything. The second one will have an opinion about all of it, but won't do anything. And then the last one is the actual caregiver. So far, we're breaking down about that rate. Okay, so it's interesting because that's just kind of that nature that shows up. Now, it changes when you lose siblings before my oldest sibling has passed. So that changes dynamics. So our stepchildren and half and all that stuff gets played into their adoption. It all changes it. But children typically migrate to what they are, and so do you. So, in a marriage, two firstborns married. Early stages, lots of conflict. Who's going to be in charge? Because they're both used to being in charge. Now, two babies married, who's going to be in charge? Because I don't want to be in charge, and I don't want to be in charge. Two middle, whatever it makes me, no, whatever makes you, whatever. You tend to be that. So just like typically Two ISTJs do not marry, because it's like marrying yourself. You tend not to marry the same. But when you do, you have to work out some of those natural tendencies. Because I wasn't the firstborn and the people pleaser in my family, I could do that. But because I was put in the role as firstborn, we had a lot of conflict early in marriage about who was going to be in charge. Because he is a firstborn. And he was in charge. Because his brother was 3.5 years younger than him. Okay?
Yeah, theoretically, your best coupling is two middles. But then a lot of people that come up with this, they think conflict is bad in a couple, and two middle children don't have a lot of conflict. They both prefer to avoid conflict, but that can build up and blow up.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting thing is, doing marital work, I pretty much never get to see two middle children in therapy. Now, a middle child married to an oldest or to a youngest, yeah, I see them. Two firstborn, it's going to be a problem, as Sherry talked about. Two lastborn, tends to be a problem. Firstborn married to a lastborn is supposed to be a very good coupling. They tend to fit into roles naturally that they grew up in their home, and so they find a place in their marriage quickly. That may come back to bite them about 10 years down the road. But early on, it looks really good.
I have a question. Okay, isn't there, if there's so many years between like a firstborn and a lastborn?
Right.
is-
Over 7 years.
7 years, I was wondering. what
Over
the years
7
were.
years
Okay.
is the typical breakdown, and after 7 years, it's basically you're raising two only children.
Okay.
That's why there's such a big But that's why there's such a big difference between like me and my sister. There's 11 years difference. I had already taken care of so many cousins and all. She's just another baby in the house. There was no bonding in that respect of sibling, because it's just two. And we're great now. We love each other as adults. So, questions? Any other questions about that? That was fast and furious through that.
Okay, now think about, I'll throw this out and let Sherry comment on it. Think about the fact that maybe you're lastborn and still have some pent-up resentments from the way your firstborn sibling treated you, and now you're a parent of a firstborn.
And there's the both.
How does that affect parenting?
Yeah.
Oh, man. No, we didn't get to gender, did we?
No, we didn't get to learn stuff. Okay.
Oh, wow.
One of the important things for you to remember is because you assumed roles that you didn't even really, up here think about, you just were. How you parent your kids will play into that, because you're going to protect some of those feelings with your own children. You just naturally are. If you were the baby and you really resented your older brother or sister, especially sister, because us older sisters, we're bossy. We're bossy. And we're just naturally great second mamas. And you are the sibling who got to have all that extra bossing, so now you're the mom. It is very possible that one of your high agenda items will be your child, your firstborn, will never be the bossy one. You will not be in charge of the children, because you're protecting that soft spot that still hurts from you love your older sibling. You're grateful they kept you out of the scrapes that you could have really gotten into, but it's a tender spot. So you may tend towards protecting certain things about that. And that's nothing wrong with that. It's just thinking through it, being sure you're aware. If there's this catch between you and one of your kiddos that you just can't button heads over, stop and look and see if it's about that birth order or personality, because it could be that too. All right.
Next week, we're going to finish up looking at differences. We're going to look at the normal pattern of development, so you know what's normal. and the way kids are supposed to be, that's really useful in parenting, because if your kid's being normal, you don't parent them out of it. You sit back and let them grow out of it. So we're gonna look at that, and that gives us the foundation for the next several lessons, which are what do you do about all this stuff? So we're gonna try to finish up with necessary background next week.
Well, just take what you've learned and see what you see in your house. See if you can start identifying some of those introverts and extroverts, some of those qualities of those different things in your own children, and how maybe you're parenting.
Oh, no.
All right, see you next week.